He's right there. He's right there. He's waiting. He's waiting to come back out because it's fine. Everything's fine. It's just, it's the penultimate episode of Monster. What do you want me to say? I am so glad. I am so glad that I'm going to do this episode. I'm going to do next week's episode. And then I'm going to have a review of Monster as a whole. And that is going to be my moment to decompress. Because I know that as I've seen with episodes 70, 71, and 72 so far, I've watched the episode. It slowly sank in as I was discussing it. And then after I discussed it takes even longer to sink in. And then it does. And you're like, what the fudge? So I'm going to need some time to let that last episode and this episode sink in before I can talk about it. And even then, I mean, here's the thing. I don't have time right now to do a live stream of Monster. I just don't, but it's going to happen this summer. This summer, I know I'm going to do a live stream for Heaven Official's Blessing. I'm going to do a live stream for Monster, and we're going to have time. By then, I'm going to have a couple months to process even more and decompress and then talk about it in full. But yeah, y'all. Last episode, my heart was in denial about Roberto being Adolf Reinhardt, Grimmer's friend, but he is. And I was in denial about Grimmer's death, but he's dead. And I'm horribly afraid that Lunge is going to die because he might. And we're on the second to last episode. And this entire series that I've been watching for a year and a half, week to week, has to somehow end. And I'm not quite ready for that and know how to process it. So here we are. I've got a couple comments before we start, but I've been holding back on watching this episode, but I can't hold back anymore. I have to watch it. It has to happen. We had a cold spell come through this morning, and so I'm wearing this sweater to warm me up, but I have a feeling my blood's going to be pumping by the time this episode's over. So what do we do, right? But as far as the comments go, I Swallow Apple Seeds was talking about that there are two names for the Grimmer and Tenma ship. One is called Trimmer, which is just Urasawa trimming away them characters. Let me tell you. So the other is Grinmar, which I think is just like grandma, which seems so. Tenma and Grimmer both seem like old souls. So it is not Old Man Yowie, though. They're in their 40s. It is not Old Man Yowie. I'm almost in my 40s. Leave me alone. So yeah, no, not going to go with that. But yeah. I want to talk about H Banana 7's comment that the girl with the I called her Sailor Moon. She had the buns. The girl that tragically was shot in episode 71, her voice actress is the same as Pikachu's. Man, so all you sadists out there who want Pikachu to just get offed because you're weird, sorry. There you go. I know. I see so many memes of like Pikachu being hurt, and I'm like, what did Pikachu do to you? So. But yeah, I thought that was interesting enough. And then Christian Kansas talked about, I thought this was really cool, about Klaus, and talked about the Ruinheim, the peaceful home story. And we talked about this in the discussion, but their comment kind of reiterated the idea of Poppy, like, you know, his character in the book kind of became himself. He was a thief. He stole people's lives away from them. He stole their names. He stole their livelihood, their emotions, and he was a thief. And then he came to this place where he suddenly realized he could start over and not steal anymore and instead give to people, like he did to Wim, the ability to live and the compassion to not shoot someone and take their life. And he changed for the better, which is great. But at the same time, the problem is he didn't own up or take responsibility for all that he stole. He can't give back what he stole. And that's the big crux of Poppy's character, is that he's just an old man. He's not this evil mastermind that the series makes him out to be. When you finally get down to it, he's just a human. He's an old man that was part of something that had more trajectory than he could contain or control. But the problem is, even though he's realized what he's done was wrong, he can't take back what was stolen. He can't give that back. And he's refusing to take responsibility and has just been hiding all this time rather than owning up to his mistakes. And judgment has come for him. And he's ready for it, but I like that Grimmer's like, that doesn't solve the problem. You just accepting death without atonement doesn't solve the problem. So I guess we'll see what'll happen with that, because Johan apparently is on the move, and I'm sure we'll come down to the city. And I know there has to be some kind of confrontation between Bonaparta and Johan. There just has to be. What the outcome of that will be, and Tenma's involvement in that, because he's with Bonaparta now, I don't know. But my final comment is Lyndon talking about how this entire time I kept getting Roberto's name wrong. I kept calling him Ronaldo, Ronnie, everything else. But Lyndon was like, I guess it didn't matter. And I was like, oh my God, his name wasn't an R name to begin with, except for his last name. But they brought up a good point. Why did Roberto end up, the kid that couldn't crush bugs, ended up as a murderer, but Grimmer did not? I mean, Grimmer was a murderer, but that they went on such different pathways emotionally. And I think that Urasawa makes a really big statement with their storylines of how Grimmer and Roberto came from the same environment, but ended up on totally different paths and with different mindsets. And you can call it conditioning, you can call it product of your environment. But I think Urasawa, it's a really good point that they make in that it can happen to anyone. It doesn't matter, you know. I feel like it's a statement of, we cannot judge people because we don't know where they came from and we don't know the circumstances that caused them to end up the way that they did. And even if we do, every person is different and unique. And that kind of speaks to the whole idea of the names in Monster, is that people are not these, you know, uniform bodies. Everyone is autonomous. Everyone has an individual soul. And to try and manipulate that, like what Bonaparta's experiments, what Kinderheim's experiments are doing, to try to make people into this uniform collective, is, one, a very folly idea because of how individualized we see people be in this series, but is one that doesn't quite hold a sustainable shape. And that's so fascinating to me. But yeah, I think you could write a whole novel of Grimmer and Roberto and how they've come from similar environments, but their trajectories were completely shaped differently. And we could talk about how Grimmer's relationship with his wife, with his son, Roberto, we don't know enough about his past and what he's been doing with throughout his adulthood. There's so many what ifs and like blanks that we don't have filled that it's just so fascinating. And I think that Urasawa does an amazing job with character work and showing us how it can happen to anyone, and how that judgment, can we really judge someone? Because you have the dad, the alcoholic dad, he's not fired that gun that we know of yet on someone, so good. But is it going to happen by the end of the series? I don't know. I'm stalling. It's been nearly 10 minutes. I'm stalling because I don't want to watch the penultimate episode, because then I only have one more and I know it's coming, but I can't hold back any longer. So here we are. So yeah, I'm excited, but I'm terrified. 23 minutes. What could happen in 23 minutes? It's the penultimate episode of Monster. What could happen? Let's find out. Maybe it'll be just a simple, quiet episode. And what if this series just pitter off like the rain? I won't be surprised if that happens. It'll be a choice. But I want Grimmer's words to come true and we see clear skies by the end of this bitch. So let's do it. We're going to start episode 73 of Monster, and we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1. Rip the Band-Aid off and see you all on the other side. I could have done like a whole thing of Werthers, I guess, but then I would just like want to dump the whole bag on top of me. That may happen next episode. We'll just finish it off. I'll just dump the Werthers on me and then hurry and pick them up before my dogs can get to them. I'm not sure what you want me to say. We have things to talk about. Whiteboard Coon is here. This is fine is here. I'm just going to call this dog This is Fine. That's It's just all this dog is called now. But yeah, I had to go pour some more coffee. That had to happen. I didn't see this coming. There was so much in this episode that I had ideas about what would happen. And there are pieces on the board that I was like, okay, I know these pieces are going to move, right? There has to be a confrontation with Johan and Bonaparta. I guess we should get Whiteboard Coon closer and analyze this a wee bit, right? A wee bit, right? Because that seems like it makes sense, doesn't it? Doesn't it? All right, we're gonna move Whiteboard Coon over so y'all can see him. And go from here, make sure my mic is where y'all can hear me. But yeah, so predictions. We might as well go into this. Predictions going in. I guess first off, we're going to just put them up here in random order and then address them as the episode happens. And if I miss something, I'll write it back here as we go. So Johan and Poppy, I guess, having a confrontation. I anticipated that. Didn't know how it would go. It's rather unfinished, which we'll talk about. Nina and Johan, we're going to talk about that. Roberto's fate. I figured Roberto was going to die, but we're going to talk about that. Lunge's Deus Ex Machina moment. God, I loved it so much. I'm just so baffled. We're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about Rudy and their involvement of my predictions with those. And then Tenma, if he would shoot or save. We're going to talk about that. And then Wim, and then Wim's dad. And where we're at there. So yeah, those are kind of the predictions, because at this point, and then if like the police arriving. Okay. And we're going to put the couple in there too, the Lotto couple. Because they kind of went, I had ideas about all of these things, and none of them went the way I thought it was going to go. So I was like, okay, good, great. Because Urasawa does an amazing job of putting pieces on the board, and Urasawa moves them around in ways that it's kind of like watching a chess match. You kind of see where things are going, and you can kind of anticipate. You're like, okay, I think these pieces are going to end up here. But then Urasawa pulls a move that in hindsight, you're like, oh, well, of course. Oh, well, of course we're going back to the beginning. Oh, well, of course we're going back to Tenma making the decision to save Johan, because that's what he does. We're going to go back to that. And we're going to talk about doctors and labels and things like that. So in hindsight, when you get to this point and you look, you're like, oh, well, of course we're here. Why wouldn't we be? But the thing is, in hindsight, yeah, but the thing about it is, in the moment, you think, well, how can Urasawa do this thing that seems like it might be predictable, but do it in a unique and captivating way? And somehow they find a way to do it. And you're like, you're just like standing ovation. I would stand up, but the camera would just, I'm like 5'8". So if I stood up right now, you'd just see my like stomach, and I'm not going to expose you to that. So no. Anyway, y'all just see my big ass when I got up to get that stupid dog toy. So yeah. The idea, I'm going to turn the sound off. No, we don't want to hear the drunk dad. Everyone being dead and going back to the rain. The rain is the centerpiece. I thought the rain was going to clear up this episode and do what Grimmer said, but I have a prediction. I think the end of this next episode, episode 74, I think it's going to be sunny outside. I think my final prediction, I think Tenma is going to save Johan. Johan's going to be like, why? And Tenma's going to be like, because it's what I do. And I feel like Johan is going to see like the sunshine outside, and Tenma's going to be like, you have a chance. There's so many loose threads though that we have to take into account. And we're going to have to talk about that when we get to it. When we get to the end, we're going to have to talk about that. I want to put up here, yeah, our loose threads for the final episode of what we have left to deal with. We're gonna address those as we go. So yeah, but the thing about it is, the dad didn't shoot anybody in this town until he got to Johan. And the reason why he shot Johann was because Johann had the gun pointed at his kid. And that's, Urasawa, I can't wait to read the last volume of the manga, because after next week, I'm going to take some time to read that last volume, gather my thoughts for that recap video before we start the series after Monster, because I've had 74 weeks of this series to think about things, and gather my thoughts for it. But I'm not guaranteeing it's going to be a very long video, because it's mainly going to be picking my favorites and talking about those and having fun with it, because I feel like we've talked about the big philosophical stuff episode to episode, but we'll definitely have an overview. But with the dad, what I love that Urasawa does is he is portrayed from the start very realistically as an alcoholic dad who he has abused whim, which is not good. We should not condone that. It doesn't make him a good... This action of saving his son, does it absolve him of all of his sins? No. But what it does do is in that moment show that even though he's a messed up person and he's done some things that he cannot take back, even though he's done things that are horrible and he cannot take back, at the end of the day, he's human and he loved his kid enough to kill another man to save him. And it wasn't because of the booze. It wasn't because he wanted Wim to get him more booze. Whatever, it was because he said, that's my son. Leave him alone. And you could tie comparisons to, you know, the foster father scenario of Poppy and Johann, or Wolf and Johann, and all these foster parents that would they kill someone else for their kid? And I don't think Johann ever had that. I don't think Johann ever had someone that would kill another person or risk themselves to save Johann just because Johann was theirs. And I think that's a big problem. Johann doesn't ever feel like anyone loved him just for him. They were always wanting to use him, right? And in this moment with Wim's dad saving him, he wasn't using his son in that moment. He wasn't saving him to use him. He was saving him because he loved him. And I don't feel like Johann has ever felt like anyone has saved him because they loved him. Right? I feel like even Johann, and we can probably talk about it next episode when presumably the surgery goes well, and it may not go well. He may still die. It may not be successful. I think it will be, but it may not be. But I feel like maybe a part of Johann felt like Tenma brought him back to life out of spite because of those other doctors. Because the first thing Johann sees and hears when he wakes up is Tenma going on a rant about how he's not appreciated and how he chose this over another scenario and he was punished for it. And, you know, Johann at the time could have thought that Tenma saving him was a political gesture, not out of love or caring, but because he had an agenda. And that's kind of why he gets wrapped up in Johann wanting to punish him, you know, and isolate him. Kind of like Wolf saved Johann, but it ended up being part of an agenda with Kinderheim. So for all we know with Johann, he's grown up his whole life believing that people have only been a benefactor to him out of some personal agenda that benefits them and not Johann. And no one's ever protected Johann, with the exception of Nina, out of just love. And Nina, ironically, her protection is him telling her to kill him, and she shoots him. So you can kind of see where Johann has gotten this sense of nihilism and this sense that no one cares about him. And we'll talk about him and Nina and the whole forgiveness angle of it, but it's so interesting that Urasawa shows us Wim's dad, and that how someone that is so flawed and has done such wrong things is deep down still a father and still human and can make decisions out of love, even if their other decisions have been influenced by addiction and influenced by demons. So it's like just making everybody human and having layers and complexity. And it's like, and I think that depending on your experience with situations like this, I feel like that also impacts, as I'm sure Urasawa is aware of, how willing are you to forgive someone, right? Because I can see somebody like, I have a great relationship with my dad. My dad is not abusive. He's not an alcoholic. He is a really great guy. But I could understand it if an audience member watching this grew up with an alcoholic or abusive father, their level of tolerance and forgiveness of his actions would be completely different, right? would be completely different. And I could see some people complaining about Wim, crying for his dad, but at the end of the day, it's a father and son. My best friend had a bad relationship with her father. Her father was abusive when she was little. And then as she got older, she developed a relationship with him, and it was one of those of forgiveness. And when he passed, she was devastated. And she's like, I know he was flawed, but he was still a person. He was still my dad. And it makes me emotional because I saw how emotional she was about it. And the part of me was like, he was kind of an ass to you. And she's like, but he was my dad. And at the end of the day, she got to know him on a level as an adult that kind of gave new context. And she's like, I don't forgive what he did in the past, but he did something better as an adult to me as an adult. And we forged a better relationship. And that, in the end of the day, you're human. What do? You either stay away and don't reforge that relationship if it's not possible, or you do. So it makes things so complicated and complex, right? But so then we have, going back to Bonaparta and Tenma about to go into the hotel to go after Lunge and Roberto. And I'm going to be taking pictures throughout this, so y'all just have to excuse me. Can we talk about how great how great Tenma looked up against that wall, that hotel with the wet hair and everything? Tenma was looking great. I was like, Tenma, you look really great. I hope that's not a bad sign of things to come. But then Wim shows up. And I love how upset Bonaparta instantly looks that Wim is there. He's like, oh no. And I was like, Wim, it's so, the trajectory of everything is so crazy, because if Wim hadn't come, Johan would not have died or would not have been shot, right? If Wim wasn't there. Because Wim was just a bargaining chip to make Tenma, we'll talk about it when it happens, but to make Tenma shoot Johan. And if Wim hadn't decided, if it's like all these trajectories, right? You have on here, you have this thing where if Nina and Rudy hadn't shown up at the one hotel, they wouldn't have seen Wim. If Wim hadn't talked to her and realized who she was, then they wouldn't have gone to the vampire's house. And subversely, Wim wouldn't have gone to Tenma and Poppy. But then if Nina hadn't gone to the house, she wouldn't have realized the memory about Poppy. And she's like, oh shit, we have to go back. There was this memory that was really key to all this that we need to go back and talk about. I wouldn't have had this roundabout moment. And meanwhile, the dad wouldn't have shown up and saw Johan going after Wim and wouldn't have shot him. And if Johan had just left Wim out of this, then I don't think he would have been shot. It's just everyone's actions and what they do makes so much of an impact and has so much trajectory, and it influences people in ways you can't really predict until it all adds up. What I love about Urasawa's writing is I'm a big fan of nonlinear history. And that's the idea that there are all these like linear history is like point A leads to point B leads to point C. That's linear history. And that's usually how people think about it. I love nonlinear history because it's like, well, there's point A going to point B, but also on the side, there's this C point that also leads to point D that influences point B, and then can lead to multiple things that benefact this moment that might go back to this that impacted this. It's just time is not something that's a straight line. It's this infinite web of all these interactions and this infinite web of people's backgrounds, their interactions, their networking, who they've met in the past, who they know, how those people interact. It's this big web that's like a sphere. And time is just, you don't know what has influenced what until one of those threads intersects. And then you see it. And that's exactly what happens in this episode. Everything leading up to this moment, all of the interactions that Tenma has had with Grimmer, with Lunge, with Bonaparta, everything has led to his decision in this moment to not shoot Johan and to hesitate. And it changes the trajectory of the entire story. And Johan's decision to point the gun at Wim changes the trajectory of the entire story. It's incredible, right? But I was scared the entire time. I get now that most of the people are dead at this point. So most of the people that would have been sniping you out of a window, Grimmer took care of them. So we're fine, right? But still, the entire time I don't feel comfortable with any of you outside. So if you guys could go in a house, stay away from some windows, get out of the damn rain, that would be amazing. If you guys could do that at this point, I can't imagine, because this seems like it's happening in early spring. And it feels like it's happening in early spring. And I don't know if any of you have ever been caught out in the rain in early spring. Your face gets windburnt and it becomes like red and flushed and you're just hot faced. But then your body is cold from getting damp and rained on and you just feel soggy. It is the worst feeling. Like these characters are all like just drenched from the rain. They are just head to toe drenched. I'm sure they all feel like drowned cats. It's probably the worst feeling imaginable. And they have to make these like life or death decisions in the rain. And it's like, but what do we do? And then he reveals that Nina is there. And at this point where he's like, oh, Nina. And Bonaparta is like, her name is Nina. Now her name is Nina. That girl is now known as Nina. And he's like, yeah, Nina Fortner. And he starts to cry because she has a name. And he says, what a nice name. I'm curious what Nina means. I think maybe we talked about this way back at the beginning. But Nina, in Spanish, it means little girl. In Russian, it's a version of Anne and can also mean grace. Okay. So if her mom's name is Anna, then Nina is a version of that. Okay. Which would explain why he was sad. He was like just thinking of Nina, tying back to her mother's name, going back to her mom that he loved. Yeah. We still don't know what happened to the mom. So that's one of our loose ends. Loose threads is Anna's death. We don't exactly know what happened to her. I'm wondering if the manga will tell us more if we don't find out in the next episode. My theory is that the secret police killed her because of her involvement in everything. It's ironic. He talked about tying up all the loose threads and trying to make sure that anyone connected to the experiment were killed, but yet she didn't die in the Red Rose Mansion. So I don't know. And he had that portrait of her. So she died somehow. I'm wondering if the secret police used her as a scapegoat, because she was part of an anti-government group to begin with. If they used her as a scapegoat and were like, you know, she had to die to cover everything, that could be. We'll see. But yeah, Bonaparta just being sad that she died. And then Wim said, you always told me to cherish my name, Mr. Poppy. And that's the thing too, is that Bonaparta telling him, like Bonaparta trying to make these small efforts to repair what damage he did outside of Ruinheim by teaching Wim to become a better person that couldn't be corrupted. I mean, it's admirable, but like Grimmer said, you got to own up to it and face responsibility. And at least he kind of does with Johan. And then Tim was like, well, here's this touching moment. And he's like, have you seen my dad? And he's like, I can't find him here. He's like, we're doing something important right now, but once it's over, we'll look for him. And then Wim's like, has he killed anyone? He's like, no, your dad isn't someone that would do that. So the funny thing is, it's like the dad that Poppy says he wouldn't kill. They would not kill. And then we're going to talk about him being labeled as the murderer. I'm glad Lunge is there to speak up. Thank God. Because we're going to talk about that moment. But it's like, you know, then do you describe it as like murder or self-defense? Or it's not self-defense. He was doing it to save Wim. But, oh my God. We're lucky that he was drunk and not a great shot. And he didn't quite hit Johan full on in the head like he wanted. He hit him in the side of the head. And then the moment they tell him to look over and there's just Johan in the rain. And Poppy's like, sons of bitches, there he is. Yep. The cinematography of this scene was amazing. The cinematography was fabulous. Like all the scope shots and like the zooms, the in and outs, and like it just makes it so much more tense. And you're like, shit. Also, I apologize if this episode was hard to see in the reaction because it was just so dark. I was like, you could see the subtitles, but the atmosphere is it's almost pitch black. Like the shadow and darkness has overtaken everything in the town. The scenery of Doomsday. And it's like that shadow is just overcast over everything. And then at the end, you see the lights of the emergency ambulance and everything. The lights cast the shadow and everything. Oh, Just cinematography wise, this episode was amazing. And I loved it so much. And he's like, Wim, find cover. But he's like, we finally meet again, Dr. Tenma. But then the thing of it is, Bonaparta knocks him down. And I do appreciate that. I like that Bonaparta, in this moment, takes responsibility. And Bonaparta's like, no, you're not the one that started this. You're not the one that created this monster. I am. I need to stand up and talk to him. I'm like, okay. Sure. And at that point, I'm like, well, at this point, we don't know what's going to happen. But I had a feeling that Bonaparta, as he's slowly walking towards Johan, and Johan doesn't look nervous. That's the problem. Johan doesn't look nervous. And at that point, I'm like, okay, Johan wants Tenma to shoot him. Johan wants Tenma to kill him because he wants that's going to complete Tenma's cycle of becoming a monster, right? That's kind of Johan's idea with this, is that Johan, he wanted, I'm going to have to scoot over so you can all see this. He wanted Tenma, by killing, Johan has become the monster, right? And he accepts that. He's like, I became a monster by killing all these people, and I accepted it. I leaned into it, and it corrupted my view of life, and it isolated me, and I want Tenma to go through the same thing. So he's like, if I can make Tenma isolated, then I can force him to kill, and it's going to complete that cycle and make him a monster as well. And that's just what I'm going to have to do. And you can see it here. I'm covering it up. But yeah. So, I mean, that's his idea and his rationale. So he's like, I have to get Bonaparta out of the way and this kid out of the way and push him to the extreme so that he'll kill me. And then he can be an isolated monster like I was. And at that point, I was like, Bonaparta's not going to kill Johan. But he's like, let's die together. And Johan's like, no. The thing that I am sad about with this confrontation, and I think Nina is going to make up for it, is that Bonaparta, in this moment, it's interesting. Because a part of me thought that Bonaparta would try to talk to Johan. A part of me thought, like, okay, you want to atone for your sins and take responsibility for your actions. Here's the monster you made. Talk through it with him and explain to him everything that we, the audience, have learned about Poppy. I'm like, explain this to Johan. But in that moment, Poppy's like, no. He's like, he tries to cover his tracks and do what Grimmer, I think, was afraid of him doing and try to make it to where Johan's gone. But we need, Johan is kind of like Poppy. And I don't think Johan realizes it. And if he does realize it, maybe that's why he's so adamant to die, because he realizes what's happened. Poppy has made Johan into the monster that he was. It's like a generational trauma thing. You have Poppy made Johan a monster. Johan made Roberto a monster. He's trying to make Tenma a monster. And then Poppy's influence caused Kinderheim to make Grimmer a monster. But we saw how Grimmer came back from that and became human again. And what I was hoping for was that Poppy was going to try to tell Johan, be like, yes, I know I became a monster, but I became human again. You are capable of that too. And own up to his mistakes. But again, Urasawa's like, no, he's human and it's fight or flight. And he's like, no, I'm going to kill. It's basically, it's like that. Like, again, Johan becomes Poppy, because Poppy, when he has the moment to kind of like rationalize, clarify, and explain everything and accept that he's human again and own up for and take responsibility, which I guess he's trying to in killing Johan. But the irony is Johan, in having Poppy killed, is becoming Poppy. He's not owning up. He doesn't want to own up to his responsibilities either. He's like, I'm just going to kill everybody and then myself, and I can escape all of this. So Johan has become Poppy, and if he's aware of it, it makes sense why he's so nihilistic, because he's like, shit, I'm just like the monster that I hate. I hate myself. I'm just going to destroy everything and myself, and that'll solve the problem, which is exactly what Poppy wanted to do. But Grimmer was like, no, you have to live and tell people about this shit. Well, now Poppy can't live and do what Grimmer wanted him to. So I feel, we'll talk about it a little bit more when we get down to it. I'll probably reiterate this, but I feel like Tenma's like, no, Grimmer told me that my job is to save people, and Johan needs to own up for what he's done. He wants to die. He wants to die. He wants the easy way out. He doesn't want to own up to what's happened because of him, with Milosh, with Junkers, with all the people he's influenced to kill others, with the influence that he's had. That's the thing. Part of Poppy's sins are not just the actions he took, but the influence he had on Kinderheim's creation, the influence he had on what Kinderheim did beyond through his experiments and translated that. Like, Kinderheim, I'm sure, was in development before Poppy, had his experiments, but Poppy's experiments further influenced Kinderheim, and Johann's influence has caused a trajectory of people dying. And so I feel like Timma, if he saves Johann, is going to be like, no, you don't get the easy way out to die. You don't deserve that. You're going to live, and you're going to have to own up to the fact that people forgive you, and you're going to have to own up to what you've done. You don't get to just erase yourself from the equation. You don't get to erase yourself from the narrative that you wrote and then leave that burden on other people. And I'm kind of rooting for that to happen. I don't know if that's going to be the case or not, but Poppy's just trying to like erase the narrative and be like, well, I like Nina, but this kid's a monster, so I'm going to get rid of him. And then Roberto shows up. I also love that what I think Johann wanted at the end, because we see that showdown between Tinma and Johann in the desert, in the border. And what I think Johann wanted was for Tinma to kill Johann, and it would just be Tinma alone at the border, which is the last image we see in the OP. And Tinma's like, no, I'm not doing that. Well, he was going to do it, and then Nina convinced him otherwise, and now he's like, no, I'm going to save you. Because that's what I do. We'll talk more about it. But no, I just wish we'd gotten more with Poppy and Johann talking. But I think that entire moment is going to be reserved for Nina. Because I think that in that moment, whatever Poppy could have said to him, I don't know if it would have affected Johann or not. Because no, even when Nina brings it up and she's like, hey, I forgive you. He's like, it's no good. I feel like Nina's got to, like, while Johann is sitting down and has no choice but to listen, she's got to be like, no, you don't understand. I didn't get to tell you about the memory that I remember that I don't know if you remember because you weren't there. But I don't know if Poppy talking would have helped the situation in the end. But it's like Johann gets to see him die. And with scenery for a doomsday. I love that before we get to Roberto's reveal, I love we just see Rudy running and he's like, son of a bitch. Rudy's like, I didn't prep for this. I've not been training like Reichwein in a gym. He's like, I've not been going to work out every day. He's like, I'm legit tired. I might mildly have a heart attack from this. But Nina's like, I've done Taekwondo. We're fine. And he's like, son of a bitch. She's like, I have to find him. And she's like, back then I remember, this is like the cruelest irony, is that Nina remembers the final conversation she had with Poppy. And we think it's going to be this big bombastic moment of like, oh my God. We think that's what it's going to be, right? No. What it ends up being is him telling her when he's like, listen up. Everyone's going to forget what they just saw. And he's like, run away as far as you can. Like, he wanted them to get away. This whole time, I thought that he's been trying to chase her down and find her. He wanted to reconnect with her, but he wanted her to get away because he knew they would kill her if they found her. And he's like, you have to get away. You too. The thing that just kills me is it's like he viewed Johann and her as treasures. He didn't just say you. If it would be one thing if he had just called Nina out as being his treasure and had wanted to leave Johann out of the equation, and that's why Johann was pissed, that would make sense. But he viewed them both as treasures. He's like, you both have to run away. Forget what you saw here. Leave a life outside of this and get away and do that. And she's just like, okay. And she manages to do it. And he says, people can become anything. And when you think that he's going like that whole time he's had that hand going towards her head, the entire series, I thought it was a gesture of him like trying to wipe her memory away or like suffocate her or do something violent to her or assault her. But no, that's not been the case. Instead, what he was doing was he cups her cheek and he caresses it, and it's an act of love. And in that moment, he tries to calm her down. He says, "You two are beautiful treasures." And he's like, "I don't want you to become, that's why you mustn't become monsters." And it's like, oh my God. To realize that his last moments to her were not trying to wipe her memory out of malice, and they weren't sinister, but his last moments with her were him telling her, "I don't want you guys to become monsters like I am. So that's why you have to run away and get away from all this." And my thing is, I don't know if I don't think Johan remembered that. Because I don't think she told him that. I think she was so traumatized by what happened, she didn't get to tell him that part of it. So Johan only believes that Bonaparta was this evil force. He doesn't realize that last sentence where he kind of was like, shit, I messed up, and now I'm trying to reconcile and get you guys out of here. And that's why I want Johan to live, because I kept thinking that she was going to tell Johan that. I kept thinking she was going to explain what Bonaparta said, but he was already shot at this point. That's going to be the cruel irony, is that she's going to be like, look, this guy actually saved us and tried to reconcile for what he did. And then Johan's like, oh yeah, I got him shot. That's so insane to me. That I want Nina in the hospital. I want Johan to sit there, and to Nina be on one side and Timma be on the other side, and for her to be like, look, this is the truth of the situation, whether you want to believe it or not. And and him talking to her, and the shadows, the reflection of the windows on the floor, everything. Oh my God. And that's when she ran away. It's all coming together, right? Oh my God. And she's like, that's what he said to me. That's why I have to tell Johan that it's okay to forgive. And then we cut to Bonaparta dying. And of course, Wim goes up to Mr. Poppy. And then Roberto shows up. And again, we talk about trajectory. Adolf, Roberto, who couldn't squash bugs, kills the monster of the series, arguably. Whether you believe he's really a monster or not, he is the OG monster. Bonaparta is. He kills him. And it almost feels like a kind of come full circle moment. And then he's like, I wanted to see that scenario of Doomsday. And Johan's like, you're not going to see it. You're going to die before that happens. Yeah. But Timma can't do anything. And Roberto, before he does anything else, he dies. And Wim's not able to run away. And then Roberto looks over at Johan and then passes out himself. It felt very Hamlet. I'm not going to lie. I was like, it felt, because I imagined the end of this movie, or the end of this series, everyone being dead. I imagined everyone dying and it just being Timma. Or Timma dies as well. They both kill each other somehow. And then the cops come in and everyone's dead. And it's like Hamlet. And they're like, oh, what happened? And then Eva and Reichwein and Dieter have to pick up the pieces. Now it's like Nina has inherited her own orphan child. She's inherited Wim. We'll talk about that in a hot second. And then Timma has Dieter. I want Wim and Dieter to become friends. I think they would have a great time. And plus, Dieter's been needing somebody to play soccer with him this whole time. Eva ain't getting off that couch and doing it. So Dieter needs Wim to play soccer with. Come on now. And I want to look up what Wim means. What Wim means in German. Wim meaning. What does it mean? It means will or desire, or helmet, or a resolute protector. What does Dieter mean? Dieter means a person who's trying to lose weight, a person who's dieting. Oh, army of the people. That makes much more sense. Oh, wow. Army of the people, and then a protector or a desire. I feel like Dieter and Wim could become best friends. We'll talk about this in a little bit, but I want them to end up together by the end of this. But yeah, so Roberto's dead. And so is Bonaparta. And he's like, you'll never see it. Yeah. So then here's this moment, right? Johan, he says, Dr. Tenma, according to you, lives are equal. But that's why I live today. But you must have realized it by now. That the only thing people are equal in is death. And it looks like there are tears in Johan's eyes. I can't tell if it's the rain or if it's him crying. So Johan's whole MO at this point is that people are not equal. People are not equal except in death. But then there's the argument, right? There's the argument that even if that is true, everyone deserves to be saved. Is what I think it's going to come around to, is that Tenma's going to be like, you're right, we aren't born equal. Some people are always going to have the advantage over others, whether it's through the social class they're born in, whether it's through the environment they're born in, whether it's through the circumstances surrounding where they live, where they grow up, their careers, networking, this nonlinear spherical ball of time and space that determines so many things that are within and without our control. But at the end of the day, we're all human. And at the end of the day, we may only be equal in death, but that doesn't mean that one person deserves to be saved over another. Everyone deserves the opportunity to be saved. And I feel like that's what he's going to come back to and tell Johan, being like, Dieter does not deserve to be saved any more than Wim does because of their upbringing, whatever. One person's life does not deserve saving over another. They're all equally deserving of it. And oh my God. And I feel like Johan is so nihilistic, and he focuses so much on the inequalities of the world. He's focused his entire existence on how unfair life is, right? Because, you talk about him and his sister and the inequalities between them based on their gender. He was a boy that was taken to Kinderheim, but because she wasn't male, she was sent to another orphanage. Like, there's been all of these disadvantages in Johan's life that have led him to believe that because life isn't fair and equal for everyone, then there's no point to it. And Tenma, on the other hand, has experienced all these scenarios that point to the opposite, saying like, yes, life is unfair and it's not equal, but that doesn't mean that one person's life is less worthy than another's. I could cry. I could cry with the themes about this series. I probably will next episode. Why not? And then he points to that damn head and he's like, come on, go ahead and end it. And he's like, let's go. Prove me right. He's like, you can see it. The scenery of Doomsday. And he's like, you can see where it's going. I love these. Like, you can see just like I can how cruel this world is. And it's so amazing that Johan, he wants to make Tenma a monster because he's like, the world that I see. You've seen it now. You've been through what I've been through. So you know how pointless it all is. Now just ended. He's like Darth Sidious, where he's like, go. He's like Darth Sidious talking to Luke Skywalker in Return of the Jedi, where he's just like, go, fulfill your destiny. Strike me down with all your anger and you will complete your path. It's just like, yeah, that's literally what he is, right? And then, Nina has to come in like Darth Vader and be like, now wait a minute. And I'm like, I was waiting for Nina to come in and tell him no. And then they're on the border there, on the outskirts. I love that it gets so light in that moment. You can see them so clearly. And there's just like such a wind and such a force, and it's shaking almost. And he's like, come on, just kill me. You know you want to. He's like, you want to, right? Oh my God. It's insane. I'm going to have to reopen this back up. Reopen my thing. Reopen my movie. The movie was so powerful that it started back to that moment. Yeah. And I love how that's depicted. It's so epic, this showdown between the two of them. And even though I was thinking that Nina would stop them, I was like, please. I was like, please show up. Because there was a part of me that was like, I think Timma might actually kill him. There's a part of me that's like, I think Timma could kill him. I'm not sure. I don't want him to, but I still think there's a moment he could pull the trigger. And then Nina's like, no, don't. And he's getting so close. And then that's when she's like, you mustn't shoot him. And Rudy's like, please don't do it. And then and of course, Johan puts the finger down because she's there. And then she's like, I forgive you. Because that's what she didn't say before. She's like, I forgive you for not going through the same thing I did, for everything you've done. Even if we were the only people on earth, I would still forgive you. Because she's like, even though you've done these horrible things, I forgive you because I love you and you're my brother. It's like the whole conversation with Wim and his dad. Even though he's done these awful things, I feel like Wim forgives him in the end because his love for him outweighs the bad that he's done. And it's the same for Nina. The love she has for her brother outweighs the bad that he's done. And that's not going to be true for everybody, but it is for her. And the idea that one person could be the salvation of someone is a big deal, right? Because it's like Petrov, it's like Poppy. They just needed that one person and their kindness to impact them and completely change who they are and what they do from that moment on. It doesn't take back what they've done. They still need to be responsible for it, but it at least shows them they're not alone and that there is somebody that cares about them. And the thing that gets me is Johan believes he's so far beyond it. He's like, no, he just looks so dead. And she's like, that's my message to you. And he's like, it's no good. And he's like, there's something you can never get back. And he's like, you can't go back. Dr. Timma's going to shoot me. That's what frustrated me so much about this moment, was because Johan is correct in the fact that you can't go back. He can't change what he's done. But for him to say, oh, Dr. Timma's going to shoot me, I'm like, you ain't a damn fortune teller. You ain't mind controlling him. I'm like, you don't know if that's going to be the case. I'm like, he's so sure of how people are going to act that I'm like, you're screwing yourself over. Like, she's saying people can change. You can't change the past, but you can change your future. And Johan doesn't believe that. And he says, isn't that right? You're going to shoot me. Isn't that right? And then he pulls out the gun and Nina's like, the fudge. And the thing that got me was he pointed it at Wim. He's like, I'm going to make you shoot me. He's like, you're going to do it. And he's like, and just the look on Johan's face, because I think at this point, Johan's so desperate. He's so desperate to be punished. He's so desperate to be judged, right? Because Nina's forgiving him and he's like, no, I'm not worthy of forgiveness. Of course you forgive me because you're my sister. Of course, you're the one light in this world to me. Of course you would forgive me. But he's like, Poppy wasn't going to forgive me. Poppy pointed the gun at me and was going to shoot me. And he said it. He's like, we're going to die together. He was going to shoot me. That was going to happen. And so he's like, I need this judgment passed over me. Poppy can't do it because he's like, everybody keeps getting in the way of Johan getting judgment, right? Everybody keeps protecting Johan or making it to where he can get away. And he's like, no, I want judgment. He's like, Poppy couldn't give it to me because Roberto stopped that process. Nina's not going to judge me. She's going to let me go. He's like, you're the only one that could judge me, Tenma. So judge me. He's like, you're going to do it, right? And he's trying everything in his power to get Tenma to judge him, to punish him. And it's like, Johan, if you wouldn't have pointed the gun at Wim, you wouldn't be punished. But Johan just doesn't believe he's worthy of that forgiveness. And Tenma's like, and you can't blame Tenma for getting mad in this moment because he's like, why are you doing this? And just the look on Johan's face. He just wants to be judged and he wants to be killed. And he's like, isn't that right? And poor Wim is like, but then that's when the gun fires and it's the dad. And that's what hits him. Oh my God. It's insane. Yeah, and they're all just like, I love that it forms this like circle. It's this circle of all of them. There's Johan there, there's Poppy there, there's Roberto there, there's Wim and Rudy and Nina forming this circle, and then Tim is outside the circle, like, what do I do? And the dad's outside the circle. And then we see the dad like talking about the devil coming to kill everyone. And it makes sense why he shoots Johan in that moment. Oh my God. So then the police decide to show up. They just show up right at that moment. Fate, call it what you will. I call it storytelling. I mean, they had to show up right as things was going down to get there in town in time. Of course they had to. Absolutely. But them showing up in the town and being like the beacon of light, right? The DKMIF on the west side of Ruinheim, and they have the stretchers, and there's just dead bodies everywhere. And the news coverage is like, what the heck is going on? The town's been wiped out. What happened in this quiet town? There's only one person to press charges against, Herbert Knopp. So it's Wim Knopp, unemployed. I want to know what Knopp stands for. I want to look that up. Knopp meaning a gnarled man, a knot in the wood. Ooh, interesting. I like that. A knot in the wood. My thing is, it felt like so true to life that the one man originally before Lunge shows up as a freaking Deus Ex Machina, but not in the way I thought he would be. Not in the way I thought he would be. But he shows up like a Deus Ex Machina, and against all odds, right? Lunge showing up and just being like, oh yeah, no, it's not the drunk dad that's at fault. It's Roberto. We'll pin it on Roberto since Roberto did most of the killing. Because that's the thing. Roberto, he did kill almost everybody there that we know of, right? I mean, there were those goons that were with them that Grimmer got, but Roberto is the main threat. Like, Johan did not shoot that gun at anybody, but Roberto did. And the other people just killed themselves. But it's so true to life that the guy that gets scapegoated is a man that they make note is unemployed. They make note he's an alcoholic. And they make note that he's not making sense. Even though the double standard is real. Because if you notice, they call him out for being unemployed, for being an alcoholic, for being drunk. Even though we've not technically seen this man drink for hours, right? He's been wandering around the city. We've not seen him drink for hours, but he's a chronic alcoholic. So it's probably he's just always in a stupor. And they call him out for those two reasons and then say he's babbling nonsense and that he's the scapegoat for the murders. But then they get to Rudy, who's trying to explain things and is also not making sense. But because Rudy is someone that seems like they're, employed and of sound mind, we'll believe him. And then to make it even more layered, then they're like, oh wait, no, there is a police officer. We'll believe him. We'll believe Lunge. Even though Lunge is technically unemployed too. They made note of that. Lunge got fired from his job. He is unemployed just following this case. But because of his connections and who he is, they will believe him over Knopp. And you could argue that there's reasons they won't believe Knopp, of course, but it's just Urasawa making a commentary on how the person that's kind of villainized is the first person we're going to throw under the bus and scapegoat, even though the only person they shot was Johan, who was responsible for everything else. And like Wim says, was defending him, but that didn't matter. We need somebody to pin this on. This guy is the most likely to get it done. Let's just do it. Easy peasy dumb. I'm hoping that he gets out, and I'm hoping they pin a lot of this on Roberto and just call that a day, because Roberto did cause a lot of it. So do that. But it's just, God, it was so hard to hear that. I'm like, oh no, he did save Wim. Like, Johan was probably going to shoot Wim to get Timma to shoot him. And he confessed. They shot a man. It's awful. And in that moment, it's like, it kind of like, the thing about it is that Wim's dad kind of, in a sense, he doesn't argue, he doesn't deny, he just sits there and takes it. He's like, yeah, I'll be the scapegoat, I'll do it, fine. makes me feel for this guy. Even though he's been awful, it makes me feel for him. It's just like the whole thing with Poppy. And with Johan. At the beginning of this series, I was like, oh, get Johan out of here. Get rid of him. I'm not going to be sad if he dies. And now I'm like, no, save his life. Make him live and answer for everything. And become a better person. I'm going to put up here Trigun spoilers for a hot second. Like 30 seconds. Give me 30 seconds. Watching this episode gave me such like a Millions Knives scenario where with Johan at the end of Trigun in the 1997 anime, at the end of Trigun, Vash, who is Knives' brother, is like, no, you're a terrible person. You've caused the deaths of a lot of people, but I'm not going to kill you. I'm going to make you atone for what you did, Mother Trucker, and you're going to come back and get rehabilitated and just live your life and become a better person and enjoy life, damn it. And he like carries Knives on his shoulder and brings him back begrudgingly, and that's the end of the series. And here I want Johan to be the exact same way as Knives. I want Timma to be like, no, you're going to live. You're going to become a better person. You're going to see the value in life, damn it. So, end of Trigun spoilers, but this whole episode made me just think of that. And I was like, oh my God. So yeah, so then it looks like and poor Rudy is like, he's like, I've tried to explain it to y'all. And the officer's like, sir, I don't have a master's degree in psychiatry. And this is sounding awfully, awfully convoluted. And Rudy's like, you're telling me we've had 74 weeks of this. He's like, if you just let me go to the office, I got my novel ready. I'll give it to you. I've been working up. It's not been to a publisher yet. It still needs to be edited, but I'll give you the manuscript. You can look it over. And honestly, when the officer says, so a young man named Johan destroyed this town in order to commit suicide, that sounds like the most convoluted thing ever. But it's so true. And Rudy's like, it's a lot, but you had to be there. I love the way they animate this officer and this other officer looking at Rudy like, really, man? This sounds highly suspicious. And he's like, look, it's a lot. And then that's when they find out. I love Nina and Timma next to each other, like just both like looking completely dead to the world. They're both like, oh my God, like what else can we do? And then them both just being like, welp, what is there left to say? And then going from there, but oh my God. Yeah. We've secured an injured police officer in the hotel. And I don't think his life's in danger, but his sense is messed up. Oh, I wonder if his sense of touch is gone. What if Lunge can't touch things anymore? Oh no. What if that happens? And I feel like there's not a single officer that can explain what's going on. And then Lunge's like, there is one. I love it. I love that Lunge is a deus ex machina. So the officer they're talking about, they's messed up. They must be referring to somebody else. Maybe the other police officer. I don't know. But, or maybe they were referring to Lunge, and then Lunge's like, I know. He like that deep voice resonates. I freaking love Lunge. I love him in this moment. He's our deus ex machina. He saves the day by giving some credibility. I was talking to Maya in the Discord, and Maya has liked Lunge since day one. But the way I see it is, I feel like once you've seen the series as a whole, Lunge's character changes a lot. A lot. He changes so much from the first time we see him. He has developed so much as a character over the course of this series to the point where he not only acknowledges that Johan exists, but demands that Timma comes and saves him, presumably so Lunge can question him, but to save him, it's incredible. And to the point where Lunge no longer cares about convicting Timma, but rather wants Timma's prowess to save him. Yeah. But I was trying to tell Maya, I'm like, if you come to someone watching this series for the first time, having watched the entire series, of course you love Lunge. How could you not? He's an amazing character. But I think sometimes we forget at the very beginning how different he is. It doesn't feel like he changes a lot, but he changes so much. And I'm like, you have to sit through you would not get an appreciation of Lunge if you knew from the beginning that he was going to be a great character by the end. You have to experience Lunge in real time, develop week after week with you to get that full appreciation. And that's what happened with me. So the moment that Lunge was like, I know everything, I'm like, yes, you do. Yes, you do know everything. Spill the beans, honey. Spill the tea. Oh, I'm from the BKA. Like, just go ahead and check. And then he's like, is Roberto dead? What I like about that moment is Lunge saying, is Roberto dead? Acknowledges that in that moment, he's like, okay, that means he can't contradict anything I say from now on. Right? In that moment, Lunge's like, he's the culprit and he can't say that he's not because he's dead. So he's like, I can pin everything on him as the scapegoat because he's not a living person anymore. I can take it off the dad. I can put it on him and we can convict him. And there's our scapegoat. It's a dead body. What can he do? And that's it. And that's what he does. And I'm like, fuck yeah, Lunge. I realize I've cursed more and more with this series as we've moved on, but it seems fitting. He's like, I tried to deliver the final blow, but he lost consciousness. He's like, I got away from him and headed downstairs, and I heard his voice behind me, and then he knocked me out. And then he said this. He says, I still can't see it. The world of the end. And so there's a couple things with that. One, it in the moment with Lunge's story, it offers credibility because it means for Lunge, he can say, yeah, this guy, he was spouting off this crazy stuff. So talking about the end of the world and everything. So if you want to talk about somebody who's we can scapegoat for not being in their right mind and for being probably a guy working and has blood on his hands, here's your man. What he can't argue this fact, he's dead, but we can, say that he was not right in the head and committed all of this, trying to start some apocalyptic scenario. There we go. There's a story for the news. Put it on your news channel, slap Roberto's name on it, and go for it. And it sucks for Roberto, but I could see that. I could see the wheels turning in Lunge's head, and that's what he wants to do. But then the other part of it is the really sad notion that Roberto was trying to see the world that Johann said existed, but he couldn't see it. That's the sad part about all of this, is that Roberto was like, I keep trying to see this doomsday scenario, but I don't see it. I keep trying to see this horrible end that you're talking about, Johann, but I don't see it. And that's what makes me so frustrated with Johann, is that he tries to make everyone be as nihilistic as he is, but these other people can't see it because there is no world of the end. It's just his nihilism. And the others, what sucks so much is that Roberto had a chance to become, as an adult, that kid he was back then that was kind, and it never happened. And it sucks so much. Like, it's so sad to see it that way. And then he's like, we'll talk to you after you get treated. And then, so then we had the lottery couple. I thought the lottery couple were going to kill someone. I thought they were going to die. They end up living, and they end up being the teachable moment. They end up being we didn't need that money all along. This life or death slaughter of this town has taught us the value of our marriage and how to appreciate ourselves. And I'm like, oh my God. Like, are you freaking kidding me? But it did. There we are. They learned their lesson. I was like, oh my God. Yeah. And he's like, the lotto tickets. So they end up not getting the lottery money. They don't get the lottery money, but they gained. It wasn't about the destination of winning the lottery. It was the journey and the friends we lost along the way. Monster. It's about the friends we lose along the way. Shit. And I like the light shining on them as they're both realizing this about themselves. It's just like that idea of light and darkness, everything. And then they're like, oh, we're all together. And I like the cops like, these two suspicious lovebirds. Gonna let them go because they look like they're normies. Again, the double standard, it's amazing. But it's so true to life. Urasawa, you madman. And then here's the thing. Yeah, these two suspicious people talking about lottery tickets, blood all over them. Nah, they're a couple. They're hugging it out. They're fine. But we saw Tenma, our mass murderer elect. And I love that they're getting ready to like pull him over. At this point, Tenma and Nina are just like, they've been through the ringer, and they're just like, well, neither of us killed Johann, so I guess there's that. And they're just sitting there just disassociating together. And then as they're figuring out who Timma is, that's when we cut to the chopper. And who gets placed next to each other? Why, a chopper with seating for two? Lungay and Johan. Mm-hmm. And the guy's like, nah, he's not going to make it, but this is protocol. We've got to take him in, but he's not going to live. It'd take a special brain surgeon to do that. And then Lungay's like, he like looks straight at the camera and he's like, I know one. And I just love this moment because Lungay sees Johan. He finally figures out who he is. And he's like, yep, so he's real. And he says, is he alive? And they're like, no, not with that head wound. He's gonna not make it. We couldn't save him even if we had a brilliant brain surgeon. And Lungay's like, I want to question this guy, so let's save him. And he's like, no, there is one that could do it. And he's like, call them. He's the wanted criminal, Dr. Tenma. And they're like, your patient is waiting for you. And again, I love it because it was set up with Grimmer all along that Tenma was going to be someone to save someone. And it makes sense. It should have been something that we were like all along being like, no, Tenma's going to save him. Again, he's going to have the choice. And what I love about this moment is that Nina, she's like, I've forgiven him. I'd love to tell him again to his face, but I've forgiven him. So whatever happens, she's like, I forgave him. I'm living with that. But I understand why you wouldn't forgive him. Like, he's ruined your life. So I can understand why you would not forgive him. And the thing about it is that as Wim is screaming, my dad is not a murderer, I feel like that has such a huge impact on this scene too, because Wim's like, my dad's not a murderer. And if Timma let Johan go, if he let him die, and there's no explanation, because all we're banking off of, at this point, Tenma does not know that Lungay has vouched and put the blame on Roberto. Tenma doesn't know that. So Tenma doesn't know that Lungay has pinned the blame on Roberto for all of this. He has no clue. But even if that's the case, the fact that Wim's dad, that Herbert shot Johan, if Johan dies and cannot testify that he pointed the gun at Wim, then they're relying on the word of Nina, his sister, and they're relying on the word of Tenma, a convicted murderer himself. So if Tenma doesn't save Johan, then Wim's dad's going to be imprisoned because nobody's going to believe him. And there's no testimony other than the dead man's that would justify it or confirm that. But if he saves Johan, Johan could own up for his actions, own up for his existence and the trajectory it's had in this entire damn story, and Wim's dad might be released. So, I mean, Johan would be imprisoned, of course. Nina would probably go visit him, of course. But I think that was the tip of the scales where they're like, we have all these questions for your dad, and Wim's just like, he was trying to save me. Wim's like, after everything that happened, after everything that he's done. And that's kind of the thing too, is that Wim's father has had this label of being a terrible person, of being a monster on him this whole time. But the only thing he did was an act to save Wim and to try to save someone in that moment. And Tim was like, well, son of a bitch, I've had this label on me. I could either lean into it, let Johan die, and get away with saying, oh, I'm not a total monster. I didn't actually pull the trigger. But it would be like him pulling the trigger if he just let Johan die and didn't try to save him. Because as Grimmer says, you're a doctor. It's the idea of names, of labels. You're a doctor. Your job is to save. So here's your chance. And Nina says, I want to forgive him. I want to forgive him. She's like, but you're not wrong in what you did back then and what you're going to do now. She's like, I want to forgive him, but she's like, I know how hard that is. And she's like, if you choose not to save him, I'm going to understand because I'm right there with you. And Tim is like, after watching Wim, he's like, nah, I'm going. And I love that he stands up. I love the shadow they cast. I love the light on him. I love everything so drab and gray and soggy and damp. And as Wim's crying, Tim places his hand on his shoulder and he's like, no, it's fine. I know your dad's not a murderer. It's going to be okay. I'm going to go take care of this. And he just nods at him and then goes and walks into the light. I'm like, oh my God, the symbolism, all of it, walking into the light, everything. And then Nina, like, next to him. And I love that she's casting all the shadows as he, like, parts the sea and walks in between all of them towards that helicopter. I wish we could have seen the three of them together. I wish we could have seen Johan and Lunge and Tinma in that damn helicopter together. That's all I wanted to see. But no. Nope. And then they fly off and then we cut back. It's like all over again. The thing that's so crazy though is that I don't remember in episode 1 if it was a black shroud or not, but it's like a black shroud over Johan. It's like the cover of darkness is over him. And Tinma is about to be this angelic presence to bring him out of the darkness. And his head is shaved just like it was back then. Except the bullet hole's in a different spot now. But his head's still shaved. And he looks exactly like that little boy. And he's like, let's go. Oh my God. So, loose ends. Anna's death. Maybe it's in the manga. Maybe we'll know for sure. Is Johan's fate. Is he going to survive the operation? Is he going to die? I think the story could go either way. I'm hoping he lives because I think there's more we can do with that. But I'm going to be curious to see what happens. Lunge's fate. What is Lunge going to do about all this and all the questioning? Are him and Tinma going to go have a beer since he can't go have a beer with Grimmer? Maybe. What about Tinma? I mean, and are we going to connect that with Eva? Eva said she could have a testimony and save him. And her testimony is seeing Johan at the scene of the crime, which is now we have Johan in custody, technically, by being at the hospital. So there's that. What about Johan and Nina? Are they going to... I want Nina to tell him about Bonaparta. Are him and Nina going to escape from the hospital like they did last time? Are they going to run off? Is Johan going to escape? Is he going to fess up to his crimes? Is he going to be responsible? We don't know. Rudy and Reichwein and Dieter and Lottie and Carl are still around. Is Dieter and Wim going to meet each other? What about Wim and his dad? I feel like we have a lot of ground to cover next episode. I feel like whatever the anime cannot cover next episode, because we have one episode left, I feel like any loose ends that cannot be covered next episode are going to be covered in the manga, which is fine. I've got the final volume there waiting for me. So next week we'll have episode 74. Watch it and do the discussion. And then I will, the following week, do a review of the manga, and included that in that will be my favorite episodes. We'll do a character tier ranking if I can find a character tier generator with all the characters. And we'll just have some fun talking about Monster as like a wrap up. And then this summer I'll do a live stream about it because that'll be fun to go back to Monster and after I've digested it some more and seen your comments and talk about it more then. So yeah. Oh my God. Oh my God. So yeah, I'm so, I had all these expectations and they all exceeded my expectations in ways I could not have predicted. I'm glad Lunge's still alive. We'll see how it goes, but this is fine. I don't know if This Is Fine will join us next week, but I'm so excited to hear your comments down below. But Monster, you son of a bitch. I'm looking forward to next week. I hope you all are too, but we'll be back to see if the surgery is successful or not. All the parallels. It's all coming full circle, y'all. And we'll check that out next week. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe. Take care. And I'll be back next week for the final episode of Monster. Bye.